I am sitting here 250 years beyond my own death, watching you scroll through that glowing rectangle in your hand, and I can see it happening right now. You're losing the one thing that separates prosperity from poverty, happiness from misery, freedom from slavery. Not your money, not your job, not even your health, though God knows that matters. No, you're losing something far more precious, something I spent my entire life mastering, something that built nations and fortunes and legacies that outlived empires. You're losing your time, and you don't even know it's gone. Let me be brutally honest with you, friend. I can see you there, checking notifications while pretending to listen to this. I can feel your attention fragmenting into 1,000 pieces, scattered across apps and anxieties in the endless noise of modern existence. And here's what terrifies me about what I'm witnessing. You think you're busy. You think you're productive. You think because your calendar is full and your mind is racing, and you collapse exhausted every night that you're actually doing something meaningful. But I'm going to tell you something that might sting a little. Something I learned after decades of mistakes that nearly cost me everything. Being busy is not the same as being effective. Moving is not the same as progressing. And filling every moment of your day does not mean you're actually living. I was born into poverty in 1706, the 15th of 17 children, pulled from school at age 10 to make soap and candles in my father's shop. I had every excuse to remain unremarkable, to disappear into history as just another hungry mouth in colonial Boston. But I didn't. By the time I died, I had helped birth a nation, invented devices that still bear my name, built wealth that provided for generations, and conducted experiments that changed how humanity understood the very forces of nature. And you want to know the secret? It wasn't genius. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even particularly hard work, though I worked plenty hard. It was something simpler and far more powerful than any of that. I learned to master my time before my time mastered me. Time. That's what this is really about, isn't it? When I was 16, a journeyman printer earned perhaps 8 shillings a week if he was steady. A master printer with a shop might clear 20 pounds in a good year, if the work came in and the clients paid. I knew these numbers because I counted everything. I watched my brother James struggle with the accounts every month, watched him chase payments, watched him lose hours to drink and arguments that could have been spent setting type. I remember standing at the press one morning, my hands black with ink, calculating. If I worked 12 hours, I could set approximately 3 forms. If I worked faster, cleaner, without stopping for gossip or grog, I could set 4, maybe 5. That was nearly double the output. But working longer wasn't the answer. Any fool could exhaust himself. The question was, how could I work times differently? Asterisk. I began experimenting with my days like they were a scientific apparatus. I divided my time into blocks. I wrote down what I did in each block, and what I discovered shocked me. I was working 12 hours, yes, but I was only truly productive times for perhaps 4. The rest was eaten by interruptions, by disorganization, by the mental fog that comes from having no clear intention. I was busy, certainly. Busy as a dog chasing its tail. But was I times effective? Asterisk, not remotely. So I made a rule. Before my head hit the pillow each night, I would plan the next day hour by hour, not loosely precisely. 6 to 7, reading and washing. 7 to 8, breakfast and planning business. 8 to 12, work at the press. Noon to 1, reading and accounts, and so forth. The change was immediate and profound. My output doubled within a fortnight, not because I worked harder, but because I eliminated the spaces between intention and action. Every minute had a purpose assigned to it before the minute arrived. When distraction called, and distraction always calls, I had something to return to. A plan, a structure, a life designed rather than merely lived. And here's what nobody tells you about this. It wasn't constraining. It was times liberating. Asterisk. Because when you control your time, you control your mind. And when you control your mind, you can accomplish damn near anything. And that's the second lesson I want you to absorb. Asterisk, asterisk. Time is your most non-renewable resource. Asterisk, asterisk. Not money, not fame, not followers or likes or retweets. Time. Once it's gone, you can't mint more of it. You can't leverage it. You can't go back and grab an extra hour from last Tuesday. I started every single day at 5 in the morning. Not because I was some masochist who hated sleep, but because I understood something most people refuse to accept. Asterisk, asterisk, the world belongs to those who show up first. Asterisk, asterisk, while everyone else was still drooling on their pillows, I was already 3 hours into my day. Reading, writing, planning, experimenting. And here's the thing, people today have more times time than I ever did. You've got machines that wash your clothes, cook your food, and transport you across cities in minutes. You've got more hours of potential productivity in a single week than I had in a month. But instead of using that gift, you scroll, you binge, you catch up on shows you don't even enjoy. You treat time like it's infinite, like there's always tomorrow. Let me tell you something I learned when I was 67. Watching friends drop dead around me. Asterisk, asterisk, there isn't always a tomorrow. Asterisk, asterisk. That's not morbid, that's time's reality, asterisk. And once you truly internalize that, once you feel it in your bones, your entire relationship with time transforms. I used to ask myself every morning, asterisk, what can I do today that will matter in 10 years? Asterisk, not in 10 minutes. Not for instant gratification. But what action, what decision, what conversation could I have today that would still echo a decade from now? That question changed everything. It made me ruthless about saying no. No to time wasters. No to people who only took and never gave. No to activities that felt good in the moment but left me empty an hour later. You think you don't have time? You have the same times, 24 hours, Michelangelo had when he painted the Sistine Chapel. The same hours Shakespeare had when he wrote 37 plays. You don't have a time problem. You have a priority problem. You tell yourself you're busy, but busy is just a word we use to avoid saying what we're really doing. Filling time instead of investing it. I see people spend 3 hours scrolling through their phones, then claim they don't have 30 minutes to read. They binge entire seasons of television in a weekend, then insist they can't find time to learn a new skill. The truth? You're making time for what matters to you right now. The problem is that what matters to you right now might be destroying what could matter to you tomorrow. When I was learning the printing trade, I could have spent my evenings in the taverns like the other apprentices. Lord knows they invited me enough times, but I made a different choice. While they were drowning their wages in ale, I was drowning myself in books. While they were sleeping off hangovers, I was practicing my writing. They called me odd. They called me obsessed. They called me a fool who didn't know how to enjoy life. 50 years later, they were still setting type for other men's words. I was setting the course for a nation. That's what happens when you understand the compound interest of time. Every hour you invest in yourself doesn't just add value, it multiplies it. The book you read today gives you knowledge you'll use to read the next book faster. The skill you practice this week makes next week's practice more effective. The discipline you build this month becomes next month's habit. But this only works if you stop treating time like an expense and start treating it like an investment. Most people spend time, they consume it, waste it, kill it, as if time were the enemy instead of their most valuable asset. You need to become a miser with your minutes. Not because you should never enjoy yourself, but because enjoyment without purpose is just another form of sleep. And you're already sleeping enough, probably too much, if we're being honest. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If someone offered you $1,000 for the hour you just wasted, would you have wasted it? Of course not. Yet an hour of your life is worth infinitely more than $1,000, because money can be earned back, time cannot. This is why I shake my head when I see people spending 2 hours arguing with a cable company to save $12 a month, or driving across town because gas is 3 cents cheaper. The arithmetic seems sound on the surface. You're saving money, after all, but you're spending something far more precious to get it. I learned this lesson the hard way in my early printing days. I once walked nearly a mile to save a few pence on paper supplies. I felt quite clever about it, calculating my savings down to the last coin. But when I sat down to write that evening, exhausted from the additional travel, my mind was dull. The essay I produced was mediocre at best. Had I spent those pence and preserved my energy, I might have written something that brought me far more than I saved in reputation, in future business, in the sheer satisfaction of work well done. You see, there's a hidden cost to every bargain, and it's measured in the currency of your life force, your energy, your attention, your limited supply of decisions for the day. Some people, and I was once among them, will exhaust themselves squeezing every possible penny from a transaction, then wonder why they have nothing left to give when real opportunity knocks. The wealthy understand this instinctively. They're not wealthy because they're careless with money, far from it. They're wealthy because they're ruthlessly protective of something more valuable than money, their time and mental energy. They'll pay a premium to have someone else handle tasks that others insist on doing themselves, not because they're lazy, but because they're mathematically literate about what matters. Consider the person who spends every weekend maintaining their own lawn, repairing their own car, and doing their own taxes. "I'm saving so much money," they announce proudly. Perhaps. But what are they not building during those hours? What skills are not being developed? What opportunities are passing by unnoticed while they're under the car or behind the mower? I call it the time tax, and unlike the taxes I so famously warned about, this one generates no revenue for the public good. It only drains. Consider the math. A broken washing machine costs maybe $400 to replace, but the amateur repair takes 8 hours over 2 weekends. If that person earns $25 an hour, hardly a fortune, they've just spent $200 of their time to save $400. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? But here's what that calculation misses entirely. Those 8 hours weren't leisure time magically converted to productivity. They were stolen from something else. From the side business that could have generated $500. From the online course that could have led to a certification and a raise. From the networking event where a career-changing connection might have formed. Opportunity cost. It's not just economic theory. It's the silent killer of ambition. The poor man's fallacy is believing that time is free because no one is paying for it in that moment. But time is the only currency that matters, because unlike money, you cannot earn more of it. Every human gets the same 24 hours. The difference between prosperity and poverty often comes down to how those hours are invested. I watch people spend 3 hours driving across the city to save $15 on bulk groceries. I see them waste entire Saturdays comparing prices across 5 different stores. They'll spend 40 minutes on hold with customer service to dispute a $12 charge, and they feel virtuous doing it. They feel responsible, thrifty, smart, but what they're really doing is training themselves to think small. They're conditioning their minds to believe that their time is worth almost nothing, that saving pennies matters more than building skills, that being busy is the same as being productive. This is how the trap closes tightest, not just by consuming time, but by shaping identity. You become a person who fixes things, who hunts bargains, who takes pride in making do. And there's nobility in that, truly. But nobility doesn't pay the mortgage. It doesn't fund retirement. It doesn't break the cycle for the next generation. I watched a friend of mine, a brilliant woman, fluent in 4 languages, master's degree from a prestigious university, spend 12 years translating documents for an international NGO. Important work, meaningful work, work that gave her a sense of purpose every single morning. Her salary? Barely above minimum wage when you calculated the hourly rate. No benefits, no pension. Contract renewed every 6 months, keeping her in perpetual uncertainty. She told herself the same story I once told myself. I'm making a difference. That's worth more than money. Until her father got sick. Until she needed $20,000 for a surgery that the insurance wouldn't cover. Until she had to swallow her pride and set up a crowdfunding page, essentially begging strangers on the internet to help save her father's life. That's when the narrative cracked open for her. That's when she realized that nobility, divorced from financial security, is a privilege she could no longer afford. She's in tech sales now. Makes 3 times what she made translating. Hates about 40% of her job, but her father's alive. And she sleeps without that gnawing anxiety that kept her up for years. Was she wrong to switch? The moralists would say yes. They'd call it selling out, abandoning her gifts, choosing money over meaning. But I call it survival. I call it taking responsibility for the people you love. I call it refusing to be a martyr to someone else's definition of success. Here's what nobody tells you about noble poverty. It's expensive. It's expensive emotionally. It's expensive relationally. It's expensive in opportunities lost and compounded over decades. The stress of financial insecurity doesn't just affect your bank account, it affects your health, your relationships, and your ability to be present with the people who matter most. It creates a constant background hum of anxiety that colors every other aspect of your life. And for what? So you can tell yourself you're pure, so you can maintain the fiction that you're somehow morally superior to those who made different choices? That's not nobility, that's pride wearing a halo. I'm not saying money solves everything. It doesn't. The wealthiest people I know often have the emptiest lives, but financial security creates a foundation from which actual choices become possible. The tragedy isn't poverty itself, it's the way poverty eliminates options. When you're drowning in debt, you can't choose the career that fulfills you. You take the job that pays immediately. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't choose to invest in your health, your education, or your relationships. You choose survival. I saw this pattern constantly in Philadelphia. A talented printer's apprentice, who could have become a master craftsman, forced instead to work the docks because his father fell ill and the family needed immediate income. A brilliant young woman, who could have opened her own shop, trapped instead in domestic service because she had no capital and no credit. This is why I'm so passionate about this principle. Money, properly understood, is stored life energy. It represents time you've already spent that you can now deploy differently. Every dollar saved is a small piece of freedom purchased. But here's where most people get it backwards. They think the goal is to hoard enough money that they never have to work again. That's not freedom. That's just a different kind of prison. True financial security means having enough stored resources that you can make decisions based on what matters rather than what's urgent. You can take the lower-paying job that teaches you valuable skills. You can start a business that might fail, but could change everything. You can say no to opportunities that pay well but cost you your soul. I learned this lesson viscerally when I was able to retire from printing at 42. Not because I was rich, I wasn't, not by the standards of the merchant class, but because I'd been systematic about saving and investing. That financial cushion didn't make me happy. What made me happy was what it allowed me to do next. I could spend years experimenting with electricity without worrying about immediate profit. I could dedicate time to civic projects that benefited everyone but paid me nothing. I could write what I believed rather than what sold. The money wasn't the point. The money was the enabler. Here's what I want you to understand. You're not building wealth for wealth's sake. You're building it for option's sake. You're creating a buffer between you and desperation. You're purchasing the ability to think long-term in a world that punishes short-term thinking. And here's what they won't tell you in business school. The people who need money the most are the ones who pay the highest price for it. The poor man pays 23% interest on a credit card to fix his car so he can get to work. The desperate entrepreneur gives up 40% of his company because he's got 2 weeks of runway left. The family without savings pays twice as much for everything because they can't buy in bulk, can't wait for sales, can't afford the higher quality item that lasts 10 times longer. Poverty isn't just expensive, it's geometrically expensive. It compounds against you the same way wealth compounds for you. I watch people celebrate paying off their debt like it's the finish line. And I understand the relief, truly, I do. The weight that lifts when you owe nothing to no one is real and significant. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Zero is not the goal. Zero is simply the starting line of actual wealth building. You know what position gives you the most options in life? Having 12 months of expenses saved and another 12 months invested in assets that produce income. That's not being rich, that's being unshakable. That's having the foundation to build something remarkable without the ground constantly shifting beneath your feet. Let me tell you about 2 entrepreneurs I knew. Both brilliant, both hardworking, both started businesses in the same year. The first had 6 months of savings. He built carefully, made conservative choices, and kept his day job longer than he wanted to. When a major client didn't pay for 90 days, he was stressed but survived. When an opportunity came to buy out a competitor at a discount, he had the reserves to do it. 5 years later, he'd built something substantial. The second had no cushion. Every decision was existential. He had to take every client, even the bad ones, because he couldn't afford to be selective. When that same payment delay happened, he had to take on credit card debt at 19% interest. When opportunities appeared, he could only watch others seize them. 5 years later, he was still scraping by, making enough to survive but never enough to build. Same intelligence, same work ethic, different starting conditions, radically different outcomes. That's what emergency funds really are. They're the difference between playing to win and playing not to lose. Now let me be clear about something. I'm not romanticizing poverty or struggle. I'm not one of those people who say hard times build character, as if suffering is some kind of virtue. That's the nonsense wealthy people tell themselves to feel better about inequality. What I am saying is this: when you have nothing to fall back on, every decision carries weight. Every dollar has a job, every choice matters. And yes, that pressure can be crushing, but it can also sharpen you in ways comfort never will. I learned to negotiate because I had to. I learned to read people because I couldn't afford to trust the wrong ones. I learned to think 3 steps ahead because one mistake could cost me everything. These weren't skills I picked up in a seminar. They were survival tools I developed because the alternative was falling through the cracks. And here's what nobody tells you about building wealth from nothing. The first $100 is harder than the first 100,000. The first 1,000 is harder than the first million. Because at the beginning, you're not just fighting the market or the economy, you're fighting yourself, your habits, your environment. Your own brain is telling you that people like you don't get to win. The emergency fund? It's how you start changing that narrative. It's proof that you can set a goal and hit it. It's evidence that you have discipline. It's a financial fact that contradicts the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. When I saved my first $200, and I mean really saved it, kept it separate, didn't touch it even when I wanted to, something shifted in my identity. I went from being someone broke to someone who had money saved. Same person, same job, but the story changed. And once that story changes, everything else becomes possible. Because wealth isn't just about the numbers in your account, it's about who you become in the process of building those numbers. It's about developing the patience to delay gratification, the wisdom to distinguish between needs and wants, and the strength to say no to yourself when it matters. The emergency fund teaches you all of that. And here's what nobody tells you about building that emergency fund. It changes your relationship with money forever. When you have 3 months, 6 months, or a year of expenses sitting there, untouched, you stop being desperate. You stop taking jobs that destroy your soul just because you're afraid. You stop staying in situations that don't serve you because you can't afford to leave. I've watched this transformation happen over and over. A woman stays in a toxic workplace for 3 years because she's living paycheck to paycheck. Then she starts building her fund. 6 months in, her entire demeanor changes. She stands taller. She speaks up more. Why? Because she knows she has options now. She's not trapped anymore. By the time she has 6 months saved, she's either negotiated a better position or she's walked out the door with her head high, knowing she has time to find something better. That's the real power of an emergency fund. It's not just financial, it's psychological liberation. Now let's talk about the second pillar, because this is where most people get it backwards. They think once they have their emergency fund, they should pour everything into paying off debt. And I understand that impulse. Debt feels like a weight around your neck. You want it gone. You want to be free. But here's what I learned the hard way. Not all debt is created equal. There's toxic debt that's bleeding you dry, and there's manageable debt that you can strategically chip away at while building your future simultaneously. If you've got credit card debt at 23% interest, that's a financial emergency. That's a fire that needs to be put out immediately. Every day you carry that balance, you're hemorrhaging money. I'm talking about real money, money that could change your life if you redirected it. Let me give you the math that changed my perspective. If you're carrying $5,000 in credit card debt at 23% interest and you're only making minimum payments, you know how long it takes to pay that off? Over 20 years. You know how much you'll actually pay? Over $11,000. You're literally paying more than double for things you probably don't even own anymore. And here's what really breaks my heart. You're doing this to yourself voluntarily. Nobody's forcing you to swipe that card. Nobody's holding a gun to your head saying, buy this now or else. But the credit card companies, they've made it so smooth, so frictionless, so psychologically effortless that it doesn't even feel like spending money anymore. It's just a tap, a swipe, a click. Back in my day, when you spent money, you felt it. You reached into your pocket, you counted out your coins, you handed them over, and watched them disappear into someone else's hand. There was a physical pain in parting with your money, and that pain, that was actually a feature, not a bug. It made you think twice. It made you consider whether this purchase was truly worth it. But now, you're spending money you don't have on things you don't need and you don't even feel it happening. The credit card companies have literally removed the psychological barrier that used to protect you from yourself. They've turned spending into a dopamine hit instead of a moment of consideration. And let's talk about those low monthly payments they advertise so proudly. $25 a month. Sounds manageable, right? Almost like nothing. You spend more than that on coffee in a week. But here's what they're not telling you in big, bold letters. At $25 a month on a $5,000 balance with 18% interest, you'll be paying for 17 years. 17 years! Your children could be learning to drive before you finish paying for that couch you bought when they were in diapers. This is the trap, my friend, and millions of Americans are caught in it right now. The average household with credit card debt owes over $15,000. Some studies show it's even higher. And they're all making those low monthly payments, slowly bleeding out their future wealth, one convenient swipe at a time. Now let me ask you something that might sting a little. What if I told you that your credit card company knows you better than you know yourself? They've studied you. They've profiled you. They know exactly when you're most vulnerable to spending. Why do you think those pre-approved offers arrive right around the holidays, or during tax season, or after major life events? It's not a coincidence. It's a strategy. They're not in the business of lending money. They're in the business of farming interest payments from people who genuinely believe they're managing their debt responsibly. And here's where it gets truly insidious. They've designed the entire system to feel manageable. That minimum payment? It's carefully calculated to be just low enough that you'll pay it without too much pain, but just high enough that they maximize the time you're in debt. It's the perfect trap. Not so painful that you panic and pay it off. Not so easy that you're free too quickly. I knew merchants in Philadelphia who would extend credit to customers. But you know what the difference was? Shame. There was social accountability. If you owed money to the blacksmith or the grocer, everyone in town knew it. Your reputation was on the line. Today, your debt is anonymous, invisible, and normalized. Nobody at the dinner party knows you're drowning in credit card debt. You hide it behind the same lifestyle they're admiring. And the credit card companies? They're counting on that silence. They're counting on you never having this conversation with your friends, your family, your children. Because the moment we start talking openly about how this system works, the moment we shine light on these practices, their power diminishes. Here's what really keeps me up at night, though. It's not just that people are in debt, it's that they've been conditioned to see debt as normal, as acceptable, as just part of modern life. Everybody has credit card debt, they say, as if majority participation somehow makes it wise. Would you jump off a bridge because everybody else was doing it? Then why are you paying 20% interest because everybody else is? The herd mentality in finance is perhaps the most expensive comfort you'll ever purchase. You're essentially paying thousands of dollars per year for the privilege of feeling normal. That's what high-interest debt is, a very expensive membership fee to the club of the financially ordinary. Let me tell you about compound interest working in reverse. You know how I always preached about the magic of compound returns? Well, debt creates compound destruction. That credit card balance you're carrying isn't just costing you the stated interest rate, it's costing you what that money could have earned if you'd invested it instead. It's a double loss. You're paying interest while simultaneously losing the growth you could have had. Imagine you have $5,000 in credit card debt at 18% interest. You're paying $900 a year just to keep that debt. But if you eliminated that debt and invested that same $900 annually at a modest 8% return, in 30 years, you'd have over $100,000. That's not a typo. Your debt isn't costing you $900 a year. It's costing you your future wealth, your options, your freedom. But here's where it gets truly insidious. Debt doesn't just drain your bank account, it drains your life force. Every purchase you make while carrying high-interest debt is actually costing you 20, 30, or even 40% more than the price tag shows. That $50 dinner? With debt, you're really paying $70 when you factor in the interest. That's the invisible tax that no politician will ever talk about because you're imposing it on yourself. I've watched people work overtime, sacrifice time with their families, miss their children's milestones, all to service debt they took on for things they can't even remember buying. The debt remains long after the pleasure fades. You're quite literally working for purchases from your past instead of building for your future. The merchants of my time understood something that modern marketers have perfected: the difference between a customer and a debtor. A customer completes a transaction and walks away free. A debtor remains tethered to you, paying not just for the item, but for the privilege of having wanted it before they could afford it. I once advised a young printer who came to me seeking a loan to expand his shop. "Benjamin," he said, "if I borrow now, I can purchase better equipment and attract wealthier clients." I asked him a simple question. "And if those wealthy clients prove slower to pay than you anticipated, who owns your shop, you or your creditor?" He paused. We worked out a different arrangement. He took on an apprentice who paid for the privilege of learning, used those funds to upgrade gradually, and within 2 years owned his equipment outright. His competitor, who took the loan, lost everything when a single large client delayed payment by 4 months. The mathematics of debt isn't taught because it's too revealing. Let me make them plain. That $5,000 you owe at 18% interest, if you pay only the minimum payment, you'll spend over a decade paying it off and hand the bank an additional $4,000 in interest. You'll have paid nearly double. For what? For the convenience of not waiting, for the illusion that you could afford something that you couldn't. But here's what troubles me most deeply about modern consumer debt. It's designed to be permanent. The minimum payment is carefully calibrated to keep you in debt as long as possible while making you feel like you're making progress. It's a treadmill engineered to go nowhere. You're running, sweating, exhausting yourself, and you remain in the same place. I see young people taking on car loans that exceed their annual salary. They're driving to jobs they hate in vehicles that lose value faster than they can pay them off. Within 3 years, they owe more than the car is worth. They're trapped, can't sell it, can't pay it off, can't escape. And the cycle continues because the solution offered is simply trade it in and finance an even newer car. This is what they call being upside down on a loan. You owe more than the asset is worth. It's a peculiar kind of poverty. You possess something valuable, yet you're poorer for owning it. The automobile industry has perfected this trap. They've studied human psychology, our desire for status, and our fear of being left behind. They know that a car is often the second largest purchase most people make, and they've structured the entire system to keep you coming back. Consider the advertisements. They don't sell you transportation, they sell you identity. They sell you the open road, freedom, adventure, and the admiration of your neighbors. They show you beautiful people driving through pristine landscapes, suggesting that this vehicle will transform your life. But here's what they don't show: the monthly payment that follows you like a shadow. The interest compounds quietly in the background. The depreciation begins the moment you sign the papers. The insurance premiums rise year after year. The maintenance costs appear without warning. I learned early in life that every financial decision is really a decision about freedom. When you commit to a payment, you're committing future labor. You're saying, "I will work X number of hours next month and the month after, and for years to come, to pay for this decision I'm making today." The wealthy understand this instinctively. They ask different questions. Not, "Can I afford the monthly payment?" but "What is the total cost? What is my money doing for me? Is this asset appreciating or depreciating? What opportunity am I sacrificing by allocating funds here instead of elsewhere?" I've watched people earn promotions and immediately upgrade their car, as if the new income must be immediately spent. They never pause to consider that this promotion was an opportunity, a chance to finally get ahead, to invest, to build security. They celebrate with new rent they can barely afford, new wardrobes, and new subscriptions. And 6 months later, when I see them, they look more stressed than before the raise. They've simply inflated their lifestyle to match their new income, sometimes to exceed it, and now they're trapped on a treadmill moving faster, but taking them nowhere different. I call this the upgrade impulse, and I see it everywhere, in every income bracket, in every generation. The belief that income growth must immediately translate to lifestyle growth, as if we're obligated to demonstrate our success through consumption. But here's what I observed in those early Philadelphia days that holds even truer now. The wealthy don't upgrade reflexively. They pause. They consider. They often maintain lifestyles well below what they could theoretically afford, and they redirect that gap toward assets, toward opportunities, toward security. The truly financially independent people I encountered weren't driving the flashiest carriages or wearing the finest imported silks. They were the ones quietly accumulating property, investing in ventures, building systems that generated income without their constant labor. Now consider how this plays in modern life. You receive unexpected money, a tax refund, a bonus, perhaps an inheritance. What happens in that moment? For most, there's an immediate mental categorization. Windfall money, found money. Money that doesn't feel quite real and therefore doesn't need to be treated with the same respect as earned income. I've watched people who meticulously budget their paychecks suddenly become careless with windfalls. A $3,000 tax refund becomes a vacation they hadn't planned, a television they didn't need, an upgrade they rationalize as treating themselves. But here's the question I wish more people would ask. What if that windfall was treated not as spending money, but as an opportunity to change your financial trajectory? $3,000 invested at age 30 could become $15,000 by retirement. It could eliminate a high-interest debt, saving thousands more in interest payments. It could be 6 months of an emergency fund, transforming your relationship with financial stress. The system that creates these imaginary necessities is remarkably effective at what it does. Marketers have become experts at identifying psychological vulnerabilities and exploiting them with surgical precision. They understand the human need for belonging better than most of us understand it ourselves. There's a fascinating study I came across about social comparison and spending. Researchers found that people who moved into neighborhoods with higher average incomes increased their spending by 13 to 17%, regardless of their actual income. They didn't suddenly need more things. Their needs hadn't changed, but their reference point shifted, and with it, their perception of what was necessary. This is the environment we're operating in. We're not just fighting our own desires, we're fighting billions of dollars in psychological research deployed to manufacture those desires in the first place. The coffee shop placement, the Instagram ad timing, the email subject lines, none of it is accidental. When you feel that sudden urge to buy something you weren't thinking about 5 minutes ago, you're experiencing the intended effect of someone's carefully calculated strategy. Understanding this doesn't make you immune, but it does give you a fighting chance. When you recognize that a desire has been artificially created, you can examine it more critically. You can ask whether this purchase serves your goals or someone else's quarterly targets. The most insidious part is how these manufactured desires disguise themselves as personal choices. We genuinely believe we're expressing our individuality through consumption, not realizing we're following patterns that have been meticulously designed and tested on thousands before us. I watch people defend their unnecessary purchases with the same conviction they defend their fundamental rights. This is just who I am, they say, not recognizing that who they are was partly constructed by exposure to thousands of targeted messages designed to create exactly that identity. This isn't about judgment. I've fallen for it too, many times. It's about awareness. Once you see the machinery, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize the pattern, you can interrupt it. The question isn't whether you have desires. The question is whether those desires originated with you or were planted there by someone with a profit motive. Let me tell you about my friend Thomas. Successful by every external measure. 6-figure income, beautiful home, luxury car that costs more than I paid for my first house. And yet, every conversation we had eventually circled back to what he didn't have. A bigger house in a better neighborhood, a newer car, the latest technology. His life had become an endless treadmill of acquisition, and the finish line kept moving further away. One evening, over drinks, he confessed something that shocked me. He said, I don't even know if I like any of this stuff anymore. I just know I'm supposed to want it. That sentence has haunted me for years because it captures something profound about modern existence. We've outsourced our desires to algorithms and advertisers. We've let corporations tell us what happiness looks like, what success means, and what we should aspire to own. And here's the truly insidious part. The system works because it hijacks something fundamental to human nature, our need for belonging and status. We're social creatures. We evolved in small tribes where status and acceptance meant survival. Those instincts haven't changed, but the environment has. Now, instead of earning respect through contribution to our community, we signal status through consumption. Instead of belonging through genuine connection, we seek validation through the acquisition of the right brands, the right possessions, the right experiences. The market knows this. Every advertisement is a small story about belonging. Buy this car, and you'll be the kind of person who has their life together. Wear this watch, and you'll signal success. Use this product, and you'll finally be attractive, worthy, and complete. But here's what they never tell you. The satisfaction is temporary by design. If you ever felt truly complete, you'd stop buying. The entire economy would collapse if we all woke up tomorrow and said, you know what? I have enough. So they engineer dissatisfaction. They create artificial scarcity. They launch new versions, new models, new must-haves, before you've even finished paying for the old ones. And here's what truly troubles me. They've made consumption itself into a form of identity. In my time, a man was known by his character, his contributions, and his relationships. Today, people define themselves by what they buy. I'm an Apple person. I'm a BMW driver. I'm a luxury brand enthusiast. Corporations have successfully convinced people that their purchases are expressions of who they are. But let me ask you something. If you need to buy something to express your identity, how solid was that identity to begin with? I knew who I was without owning anything that declared it. My worth wasn't stamped on my belongings, it was demonstrated through my actions, my words, my choices. Today's marketplace doesn't just sell products, it sells fantasies of who you could become. Buy this watch, become sophisticated. Buy this car, and become successful. Buy this clothing line, and become desirable. The underlying message is always the same. You're not enough as you are, but this purchase will complete you. It won't. It never does. Because the very business model depends on you remaining incomplete. I spent years studying human nature, and I learned this essential truth. External additions cannot fill internal voids. No amount of purchasing can buy you peace, purpose, or self-respect. These qualities must be cultivated from within. Yet advertising has become so sophisticated that it bypasses rational thought entirely. It targets your insecurities, your aspirations, your deepest fears. Every commercial is engineered by psychologists who understand how to manipulate emotion, how to create need where none existed. Consider the diamond engagement ring. Before 1938, this tradition barely existed. Then the De Beers Company launched a marketing campaign so brilliant, so psychologically engineered, that it manufactured an entire cultural expectation from nothing. A diamond is forever wasn't just a slogan, it was social programming. They created the rule that a man should spend 2 months' salary on a ring, an arbitrary figure pulled from thin air and embedded into the collective consciousness. Today, couples feel anxious if they don't follow this invented tradition. Young men save for years, going into debt for a compressed carbon rock whose actual value is artificially inflated by controlled scarcity. The women who receive these rings have been conditioned since childhood by movies, magazines, and social media to expect them to measure love by carat weight. An entire generation's concept of romantic commitment was shaped by a marketing department. This is the power you're up against. Not just advertisements, but the systematic rewriting of cultural values to serve commercial interests. Hallmark didn't just sell greeting cards, they invented holidays. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Grandparents' Day. Each one is a beautiful sentiment, yes, but also a commercial obligation. Miss one and you're a bad son, a neglectful daughter. The guilt becomes the motivator, and the purchase becomes the absolution. Fashion operates on the same principle. Why do hemlines change? Why do lapels widen and narrow in cycles? Not because of aesthetic evolution, but because if clothing styles remain constant, you'd buy less. The fashion industry must convince you that last year's perfectly functional wardrobe is now obsolete, unfashionable, even embarrassing. They manufacture shame to generate sales. Your closet full of clothes that still fit and function becomes a source of anxiety rather than abundance. I witnessed the birth of marketing in my lifetime, but even I could not have imagined the psychological sophistication it would attain. Today's marketers don't just sell products, they sell anxieties, then position their wares as the cure. They create the disease to sell the remedy. Consider how automobile manufacturers have perfected this art. Every new model year introduces features positioned not as improvements, but as essentials you're now lacking. Lane departure warning, adaptive cruise control, heated steering wheels. Suddenly, your reliable vehicle becomes unsafe or outdated, despite functioning exactly as it did yesterday. The car that once represented freedom becomes a source of inadequacy. Technology companies have weaponized this strategy with brutal efficiency. Your smartphone from 2 years ago works perfectly well for communication, photography, and accessing information, the very purposes for which you purchased it. Yet you're bombarded with messaging that you're falling behind, missing out, becoming irrelevant. The planned obsolescence is no longer just mechanical, it's psychological. The beauty industry deserves particular scrutiny here. I've watched it evolve from offering simple soaps and powders to creating elaborate multi-step routines requiring dozens of products. Each new concern they identify: pores, fine lines, dark circles, uneven texture demands its own specialized solution. They've convinced you that your natural face requires constant correction, that aging is a problem to be solved rather than a process to be experienced with dignity. What troubles me most is how this manufactured dissatisfaction extends to experiences themselves. You can no longer simply enjoy a meal or a vacation. You must photograph it, share it, and measure its value by others' reactions. The experience itself becomes insufficient. You're consuming not for satisfaction, but for content, for proof of living rather than the living itself. This creates a peculiar modern tragedy, abundance that feels like scarcity. You have more possessions, more options, more access than any generation in human history, yet you feel perpetually inadequate, perpetually behind, perpetually needing just one more purchase to feel complete. The question you must ask yourself is this: who benefits from your perpetual dissatisfaction? Not you, certainly. Your constant striving enriches others while impoverishing your peace of mind. The answer reveals itself when you follow the money and the power. Who profits when you believe you're never enough? The merchants who sell you solutions to problems you didn't know you had. The influencers who monetize your insecurity. The platforms that feed you an endless stream of other people's highlight reels, knowing full well that comparison is the thief of joy and the engine of engagement. In my day, we had town gossip and the occasional traveling charlatan. Today, you have an entire economy built on manufactured inadequacy. Every advertisement whispers that you're incomplete. Every algorithm learns what makes you feel insufficient and serves you more of it. Every social platform turns human worth into a numbers game: followers, likes, shares, as if the value of a soul could be quantified by metrics. The brilliance of this system is that it makes you complicit in your own dissatisfaction. You scroll willingly. You compare voluntarily. You chase validation that was designed to remain forever just beyond your grasp. And when you feel empty afterward, the same system offers you the cure: more scrolling, more purchasing, more striving. I watched this pattern in a different form during the South Sea bubble of 1720. People ruined themselves chasing phantom wealth, convinced that everyone else was getting rich and they were being left behind. The mechanics have evolved, but the psychology remains unchanged. Create scarcity, even artificial scarcity, and watch humans scramble. The modern version is more insidious because it doesn't just target your wealth, it targets your sense of self. You're told your body is wrong, your life is boring, your accomplishments are mediocre, and your pace is too slow. And conveniently, there's always a product, program, or platform ready to fix you for a price. But here's what they don't want you to realize: you were never broken. The feeling of brokenness is the product they're selling. Your dissatisfaction isn't a diagnosis, it's a business model. When you understand this, you begin to see the trap for what it is. The goal isn't to make you happy. Happy people don't spend compulsively or scroll endlessly. The goal is to keep you perpetually dissatisfied but hopeful, always believing the next purchase, the next achievement, the next transformation will finally be enough. It won't be. Not because you're insufficient, but because the game is rigged. I've watched the machinery evolve over centuries. The tactics grow more sophisticated, but the principle remains unchanged. Manufacture desire, create urgency, deliver temporary relief. Repeat. What once required traveling salesmen and newspaper advertisements now operates through algorithms that know your vulnerabilities better than your closest friend. The genius lies in personalization. You're not seeing generic appeals anymore. You're seeing messages calibrated to your specific insecurities, timed to your moments of weakness, delivered through voices you've been conditioned to trust. An influencer who feels like a friend. A productivity guru who promises the secret you've been missing. A wellness brand that speaks your exact language of self-optimization. And here's what makes it nearly impossible to resist. They're not entirely wrong. Some purchases do improve your life. Some courses do teach valuable skills. Some transformations are genuine. The trap isn't that everything is worthless, it's that you can't stop. One legitimate improvement creates the template. Maybe the next thing will work this well too. Maybe the next investment will be the breakthrough. This is where the dissatisfaction engine shows its true brilliance. It doesn't tell you that everything you have is worthless. It tells you everything you have is almost times enough. You're close. You're making progress. You just need this one additional element, this missing piece, this final upgrade. You become a prospector convinced the next shovelful of dirt contains gold, except the mine owner keeps salting the soil with just enough tiny flakes to keep you digging. Not enough to strike it rich, but enough to believe wealth is imminent. Just one more day, just one more purchase, just one more sacrifice. I look at the accumulation in modern homes and see something that would baffle my contemporaries. Closets overflowing with clothing, most unworn. Garages packed with equipment for hobbies were abandoned after the initial enthusiasm faded. Subscriptions to services are forgotten, but are still being charged monthly. Digital libraries of courses purchased and never opened. Books downloaded and never read. Apps installed and never launched. This isn't personal failure. This is engineered behavior, the predictable output of a system designed to generate exactly this result. You're not weak-willed or undisciplined. You're responding normally to an environment constructed to overwhelm your decision-making capacity and exploit your psychological architecture. The pattern becomes clear once you see it. Every successful manipulation requires the same fundamental ingredient: your agreement to stop thinking. They don't need to force you. They just need you to surrender the one faculty that makes you dangerous to their interests: your ability to question, to analyze, to decide for yourself. I watch this unfold across every domain of modern life, and the consistency is remarkable. The political operative doesn't need you to love their candidate just to fear the alternative enough that critical evaluation feels like a luxury you can't afford. The advertiser doesn't need you to believe their product will change your life just to feel inadequate enough in the present moment that any promise of improvement bypasses your rational filters. The algorithm doesn't need you to consciously choose endless scrolling just to feel uncomfortable enough with stillness that distraction becomes reflexive. Each system has discovered the same exploit. Your decisions improve dramatically when you pause, but pausing feels threatening when you're already anxious, already overwhelmed, already convinced that falling behind carries catastrophic consequences. So they've engineered an environment where pausing feels dangerous, where stopping to think appears irresponsible, where questioning the narrative seems like a moral failing rather than an intellectual necessity. You're told that careful deliberation is a privilege that circumstances no longer permit. The emergency is too urgent, the stakes too high, the moment too critical. You must act now, decide now, buy now, click now, share now before you've had time to evaluate whether the emergency is real, whether the stakes are accurately represented, whether the urgency serves your interests or someone else's. This is the central con. the essential manipulation underlying all the others, convincing you that thoughtfulness is a form of negligence. That wisdom requires speed. That good judgment means immediate reaction rather than a considered response. I spent years watching the most consequential decisions of my era unfold, and I can tell you without qualification, every major mistake I witnessed, every catastrophic choice, every public disaster, they all shared one characteristic. They were made quickly, under pressure, by people who felt they couldn't afford the luxury of careful thought. The good decisions, the wise choices, the policies that actually served their intended purpose, those came from exactly the opposite process. Slow deliberation, multiple perspectives, willingness to revise conclusions when evidence changed, comfort with uncertainty while judgment matured. Your grandparents understood this instinctively. They didn't have a term for it, didn't conceptualize it as resistance to manipulation. They simply operated under the assumption that important decisions deserved time, that strangers promising easy solutions were probably selling something, and that sleep between stimulus and response generally improved outcomes. What we lost wasn't just these specific practices. We lost the entire cultural framework that produced them. We lost the understanding that being easily influenced wasn't a personality trait to celebrate, but a vulnerability to guard against. That having your mind changed by the last person you spoke with wasn't openness, it was instability. There was a time when swayed by every wind was an insult, not an aspiration. When communities valued the person who said, "Let me think on it," more than the one who agreed immediately. Changing your position 3 times in a month suggests not flexibility but a lack of foundation. I watch people today pride themselves on how quickly they can adopt new beliefs, how readily they can reverse their positions, and how open they are to persuasion. They've confused intellectual humility with intellectual vulnerability. They've mistaken being thoughtful for being malleable. True intellectual humility involves recognizing the limits of your knowledge while still maintaining cognitive boundaries. It means saying, "I don't know enough about this to have a firm opinion," without immediately accepting whatever opinion someone offers to fill that void. It means distinguishing between "I could be wrong" and "therefore anyone more confident must be right." Your ancestors understood something we've forgotten, that the person most certain is often most dangerous, that volume and confidence are frequently inversely related to accuracy. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest. They built social antibodies against manipulation that we've systematically dismantled in the name of progress. They created friction points, waiting periods, consultation requirements, community deliberation that we've eliminated as inefficient. They insisted on processes that felt slow because they understood that speed serves the manipulator, never the manipulated. Think about how we've re-engineered decision-making to favor impulse over reflection. Every interface is designed to minimize friction between desire and action. Every delay is treated as a problem to solve rather than a feature to preserve. We've optimized for conversion rate when we should have been optimizing for decision quality. The tech platforms understand something fundamental about human psychology that we've forgotten. Friction isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the hero. Think about YouTube's autoplay feature. The next video starts in 5 seconds unless you actively stop it. Notice what they've done there? They've made continuing the default and stopping the conscious choice. They've reversed the natural order of things. In a world built for human flourishing, the default would be to stop, and continuing would require intention. But that design wouldn't maximize watch time. Or consider Amazon's one-click purchasing. It's marketed as convenience, and in some ways it is, but it's also the systematic removal of every moment where you might reconsider. Every additional click, every confirmation request, every moment between impulse and purchase, those are opportunities for second thoughts, for wisdom to catch up with desire. We've engineered them all away and called it progress. I'm reminded of something I observed in my own time about gambling houses. They understood that if they could keep you at the table, keep the cards moving, keep removing any natural break in the action, they could override your better judgment. The modern digital economy has taken that insight and scaled it to civilization-level proportions. We're not just removing friction from bad decisions. We're removing it from all decisions, making no distinction between buying milk and buying things we don't need, between watching one educational video and watching 17 hours of content we won't remember. The result is a strange new form of tyranny, not the tyranny of force, but the tyranny of frictionless convenience. You're free to choose, technically, but every choice architecture, every default setting, every interface design is optimized to guide you toward the choice that benefits the platform, not the choice that benefits you. I think about the social contracts I helped forge. We debated every clause, every implication. We understood that power, once granted, seeks to perpetuate itself. That's why we built in friction, checks, balances, separation of powers. The inconvenience was the point. It forced deliberation. But today's systems worship efficiency above all else. Remove friction, streamline the process, one-click purchasing, autoplay next episode, pre-filled forms that remember everything. Each innovation is marketed as progress, as liberation from tedious decision-making, yet what we call friction I might call contemplation. That moment of pause before you hand over your money, your attention, your data, that's not a bug in the human experience. It's a feature. It's the space where wisdom lives, where you ask yourself, do I actually want this? Do I need this? What am I really trading away? The platforms have studied this psychology with more rigor than we ever applied to statecraft. They've learned that humans will accept almost anything if you introduce it gradually enough. First, we were thrilled to have email access on our phones, then social media, then constant notifications, then location tracking for your convenience. Then the microphones listen for wake words, then cameras scan your face. Each step is so small, so reasonable in isolation. I remember writing about the boiling frog. Though the science was questionable, the metaphor held. Put a frog in boiling water and it jumps out. Put it in cool water and slowly heat it, and the frog acclimates until it's too late. We've been in warming water for 2 decades now, and most of us still insist the temperature is just fine. What troubles me most is how we've outsourced our memory, our navigation, our very sense of direction to these devices. I knew men who could navigate by stars, by the angle of shadows, by the moss on trees. Today, people get lost in their own neighborhoods when their GPS fails. I've watched something equally troubling unfold with what you call social media. In my time, we built relationships through correspondence. Yes, but each letter was crafted with care, sealed with intention, delivered through conscious effort. You couldn't unsend words hastily written. You lived with your mistakes. Now I see people cultivating not friendships but audiences. They don't share moments, they perform them. A sunset isn't experienced. It's photographed, filtered, captioned, and broadcast to hundreds of strangers whose approval is measured in hearts and thumbs. I've seen families sitting together in restaurants, each member staring at their own screen, updating invisible crowds about a meal they're not even tasting. The cruelty I've witnessed through these platforms chills me. In my era, if you wished to insult someone, you had to do it to their face or sign your name to a letter. Cowardice had consequences. Now, anonymous souls hide behind screens, launching vitriol they'd never dare speak in person. I've seen children driven to despair by the relentless judgment of their peers, broadcast permanently across digital networks. What we called gossip, which at least faded with time, now lives forever. Searchable, shareable, inescapable. And the comparison. The constant, crushing comparison. In my day, you measured yourself against your neighbors, perhaps the merchant across town. Your world was knowable, your aspirations grounded in reality. Now, every person compares their ordinary life to the curated highlight reels of millions. You see only everyone else's victories, their vacations, their apparent happiness, all carefully edited, filtered, staged. No one posts their failures, their depression, their ordinary Tuesday evening. Is it any wonder your generation suffers such unprecedented rates of anxiety? I built communities through shared purpose libraries, fire brigades, civic organizations. You build communities of strangers who've never shaken hands, never broken bread together, never looked into each other's eyes. Can you truly know someone through their profile, through their carefully constructed digital persona? I knew my fellow citizens intimately. I knew their character not from what they claimed, but from what they did when tested. I knew them from shared struggle, shared triumph, shared sacrifice. Your friend's online number, in the hundreds, perhaps thousands. But tell me how many would show up at your door in crisis? How many know your true fears, your deepest hopes? You've traded depth for breadth, intimacy for the illusion of connection. And the tragedy is, you don't even realize what you've lost, because you've never experienced true community. You've never lived in a world where your reputation was built over decades of consistent action, where trust was earned through repeated demonstration of character, where your word was your bond, because everyone knew if you broke it, the consequences would follow you for life. Instead, you can reinvent yourself with each new platform. Delete your past, curate your present, project whatever image serves your immediate needs. Is it any wonder trust has collapsed in your society? Is it any wonder you feel so profoundly alone, despite being more connected than ever? We speak of the loneliness epidemic, but we refuse to acknowledge its source. You're lonely because you're surrounded by ghosts, digital projections, carefully filtered representations, personas without substance. You're starving for genuine human connection while consuming an endless buffet of hollow interactions. The marketplace I frequented wasn't just for commerce. It was where news traveled, where ideas were debated, where relationships were forged. Every transaction was also a conversation. Every purchase was also a connection. Your marketplace is Amazon, a place where you never speak to another human being. You click, you buy, a box appears on your doorstep. Efficient, certainly, but at what cost? You've eliminated friction, but friction is where human connection happens. The small talk, the negotiation, the recognition, the relationship. You've optimized for convenience and lost everything that made commerce human. And now, my friends, you wonder why loyalty has become as rare as hen's teeth in your marketplaces. Let me tell you what I've observed in your modern shops, and it chills me to my bones. You have something you call a customer service representative, though that title is a polite fiction most days, who greets your patron with dead eyes and a scripted phrase. How may I help you today? They drone, reading from their mental manual, already thinking about their break time, their metrics, their exit. No warmth, no recognition, no humanity. I've watched your customers try to break through this wall of professional detachment. They make jokes, ignored. They offer personal details, acknowledged with a plastic nod. They seek connection, met with transactional efficiency. You've trained your people to treat customers like widgets on an assembly line. Process them quickly, hit your numbers, next, and then, you dare to send them a survey asking why they don't feel valued. The hypocrisy would be comical if it weren't so damaging. In my print shop, every apprentice understood that each customer who walked through that door was choosing us over countless alternatives. They were bringing us their trust, their coin, their business. That deserved honor, that deserved attention, that deserved our full presence in the moment. I taught my people, learn their names, remember their preferences. Notice when they look troubled and ask with genuine concern. Celebrate their successes as if they were your own. Not because it was a good business strategy, though it was, but because it was the right way to treat fellow human beings. You've forgotten this. You've created systems that actively prevent human connection. Your employees can't deviate from scripts. They can't make decisions without approval. They can't spend more than precisely 4.7 minutes per interaction, or whatever absurd metric you've imposed. You've optimized the humanity right out of the experience, and your customers feel it. Oh, they feel it in their bones. They know when they're being processed rather than served. They know when they're a number rather than a person. They know when you don't give a damn beyond their immediate transaction. So they leave. Not always immediately. Sometimes it's a slow drift, a gradual erosion of goodwill, but they leave. And you, puzzled by their departure, blame price sensitivity or market conditions or competitive pressure. Never once looking in the mirror and asking, have we treated these people like human beings who deserve our respect and attention? The answer, more often than not, would shatter your comfortable illusions. And here's the most dangerous part, the part that keeps this cycle spinning endlessly. You convince yourself that customer retention is about discounts and loyalty programs. You think that if you just offer them 15% off their next purchase, if you create a point system complex enough to require a mathematics degree to understand, if you send them birthday emails with their name misspelled, that somehow this constitutes care. It doesn't. These are not retention strategies. These are bribes. Poorly disguised attempts to purchase loyalty without earning it. And your customers see right through them, though they may collect the points anyway. Why? Because they've learned to extract whatever value they can from businesses that see them as transactions rather than relationships. I watch you throw money at retention programs while starving the very departments that create retention naturally. Your customer service team operates with skeleton crews, underpaid and undertrained. Your quality control gets cut when quarterly numbers look tight. Your response times stretch from hours to days to never. But your loyalty program? That gets funded, that gets promoted, that gets celebrated in board meetings as evidence of your customer-centric philosophy. The delusion is breathtaking. Real customer retention happens in moments you never measure. It happens when your representative stays on the phone an extra 10 minutes to truly solve a problem instead of rushing to meet their call quota. It happens when you admit a mistake before the customer even notices it. It happens when you make a policy exception because the policy, in this particular case, serves your convenience rather than fairness. It happens when you remember that the person across from you, whether across a counter, across a phone line, or across a digital interface, is someone's parent, someone's child, someone struggling with challenges you know nothing about, and that your interaction, brief as it may be, has the power to make their day slightly better or significantly worse. You have that power. The question is whether you have the wisdom and the character to use it well. But wisdom requires reflection, and reflection requires admitting that perhaps your current approach is failing. Most of you would rather maintain the comfortable fiction that your customers are the problem, too demanding, too price-sensitive, too disloyal, than confront the uncomfortable truth that you are the architect of your own troubles. Consider the ironsmith who blames his customers for wanting cheaper horseshoes. He mutters that they do not appreciate quality, that they seek only the lowest price. Yet when I visit his forge, I find his horseshoes crack after a month, his service is surly, and his delivery promises are worthless as continental currency. He has so convinced himself that customers are the problem that he never examines his own inferior work. You do precisely this in your modern commerce. You blame the customer for demanding lower prices while your product deteriorates. You blame them for disloyalty while you break promise after promise. You blame them for shopping elsewhere while you make the experience of buying from you as pleasant as a root canal performed by a drunken barber. The mature business owner looks first to himself. When sales decline, he asks not, "What is wrong with these foolish customers?" but rather, "What have I failed to provide?" When customers complain, he hears not noise but signal valuable intelligence about where his enterprise falls short. When competition takes his business, he studies what they do better rather than cursing their supposed advantages. This requires humility, that rarest of virtues in the commercial realm. I have built businesses, conducted experiments, and helped birth a nation, yet I have always remained a student. Every failure taught me something. Every criticism contained potential wisdom. Every competitor demonstrated something worth learning. You resist this posture because it wounds your pride, admitting you are wrong, that your business model is flawed, that your marketing is ineffective, that your product disappoints. This feels like personal failure. So you externalize. The economy, the platform, the algorithm, the customers, anyone and anything but the person staring back from your mirror. But here is what your pride costs you. While you defend your failing approach, your more humble competitor is adapting, improving, and claiming the market you believe you deserve. While you curse the darkness, he lights a candle. While you insist the world is wrong, he changes to meet the world as it actually is. Pride whispers a seductive lie, that consistency equals integrity, that changing your mind reveals weakness, that admitting error diminishes your authority. I have watched this poison destroy more careers than any external competition ever could. The proud man becomes a prisoner of his past statements. He cannot pivot because he once declared a different direction. He cannot embrace a superior method because he previously championed an inferior one. He cannot acknowledge a mistake because he built his reputation on being right. So he doubles down, again and again, investing more resources into a failing strategy simply because reversing course would require the one thing his pride cannot tolerate: admission of error. Do you see the absurdity? He would rather fail consistently than succeed inconsistently. He would rather protect his image of infallibility than achieve actual results. He would rather be respected for his stubbornness than celebrated for his wisdom. I have reversed my positions many times in my life. I once believed in a particular approach to currency that experience proved misguided. I acknowledge this publicly. I once held views on governance that a deeper understanding revealed as incomplete. I adjusted them without shame. Did this diminish my authority? On the contrary, it enhanced it, for people trust most those who demonstrate the capacity to learn. The market does not reward consistency of opinion. It rewards consistency of results, and results require the flexibility that pride forbids. Consider the entrepreneur who publicly announces his business strategy, then discovers it will not work. Pride tells him to persist, to prove the doubters wrong, to vindicate his original vision. Humility tells him to acknowledge reality and adapt. Which path leads to survival? Which leads to prosperity? The answer is obvious, yet pride makes the obvious invisible. It constructs elaborate justifications for why the original plan was actually succeeding, why the apparent failure is really a delayed triumph, and why persistence in the face of clear evidence is somehow virtuous rather than foolish. This is not courage. Courage is facing uncomfortable truths. This is cowardice disguised as conviction, fear masquerading as principle. The most dangerous person in any room is not the one who knows nothing. It is the one who knows just enough to be confident, but not enough to be humble. I have watched brilliant minds decay into arrogance, their early successes convincing them that learning was a destination they had already reached, not a journey that continues until our final breath. I knew a man in Philadelphia, a merchant of considerable means, who in his youth had read widely and thought deeply. He could debate philosophy, discuss literature, and speak on matters of science with genuine insight. But somewhere along his path, success hardened around him like a shell. He stopped reading anything that challenged him. He stopped conversing with anyone who might disagree. His intellectual world became a museum of his younger self, dusty and unchanging, while the world outside evolved without him. When younger merchants began adopting new methods, new technologies, and new ways of thinking about trade, he dismissed them all as passing fancies. "I have seen it all before," he would say, which was precisely his problem he believed he had. Within a decade, his business was obsolete. He had become a relic, not because the world moved too fast, but because he had stopped moving entirely. This, too, is a warning for our age. You live in a time of unprecedented access to information, yet many have used this abundance not to expand their understanding, but to contract it, curating feeds and follows until they exist in echo chambers more isolating than any I could have imagined. You mistake the consumption of agreeable content for learning, the accumulation of likes for wisdom, and the speed of your reaction for the depth of your thought. True education is uncomfortable. It should disturb you, challenge you, and occasionally make you question everything you thought you knew. If your learning only ever confirms what you already believe, you are not learning, you are merely rehearsing. I spent my life seeking out those who disagreed with me. Some of my most valuable friendships were with men whose politics I found abhorrent, whose philosophies contradicted my own. But in those conversations, my own thinking was refined, tested, strengthened. Iron sharpens iron, but only through friction. Today, you call someone you disagree with an enemy, a threat, someone to be blocked or canceled or silenced. You have lost the art of disagreement, which is ultimately the art of learning from one another. You have confused the marketplace of ideas with a battlefield where only one side can survive. I watched as men with violently opposing views, Jefferson and Hamilton, Adams and Paine, sat together, dined together, debated together, and somehow forged a nation from their disagreements. We did not always like one another. God knows I had my quarrels with nearly everyone at one point or another. But we recognized something you seem to have forgotten, that the person across from you, no matter how wrong you believe them to be, is still a person, still capable of reason, still worthy of being heard. You have replaced conversation with accusation. You no longer ask, "What do you think?" but rather, "Which side are you on?" As if every question of substance can be reduced to a binary choice, as if nuance itself has become a crime against certainty. Let me tell you what I learned in my many years of public life. The people who were most certain they were right were often the most dangerously wrong. It was the questioners, the doubters, the ones willing to say, "Perhaps I am mistaken," who moved us forward. Progress was not born from dogma but from dialogue. I published a newspaper, you'll recall. I printed opinions I despised alongside those I championed. I gave voice to my critics, knowing full well they would use that voice against me. Why? Because I understood that truth is not fragile. It does not shatter when challenged. Rather, it grows stronger, more refined, more resilient through the very act of being tested. You, on the other hand, curate your truth. You surround yourselves with echoes of your own beliefs, algorithmic bubbles that show you only what you already think, that confirm what you already feel. You call this being informed. I call it being imprisoned. And what happens when everyone lives in their own separate prison of certainty? You fragment, you fracture. You become not one nation, but 1,000 isolated tribes, each speaking a different language of conviction, each certain that they alone possess the truth. I watch you rage at strangers on the internet for disagreeing with you. I watch you sever relationships with family members over political differences. I watch you treat those who think differently, not as fellow citizens with whom you might reason, but as enemies who must be destroyed. This is not discourse. This is tribalism dressed in the clothes of principle. And your certainty has made you cruel in ways that break my heart. You justify any meanness, any attack, any destruction of another person's reputation or livelihood because you are certain you are right. You are certain they are wrong. And in your certainty, you feel entitled to punishment without trial, condemnation without evidence, judgment without mercy. I watch you form digital mobs that descend upon individuals with the fury of a hurricane, destroying lives over a single statement taken out of context, a joke misunderstood, an opinion that deviates from approved orthodoxy. You call this accountability. I call it barbarism. Where is your presumption of innocence? Where is your belief in redemption? Where is your capacity for forgiveness? Where is your recognition that you too are fallible, that you too might one day be wrong, that you too might one day need the grace you now refuse to extend? Your certainty has made you unable to forgive, because to forgive requires admitting that moral judgment is complex, that people are more than their worst moments, and that transformation is possible. But certainty allows for none of this. In the world of certainty, you are either pure or damned, righteous or evil, ally or enemy. I spent my life in the company of flawed men pursuing imperfect justice. I knew slaveholders who spoke eloquently of liberty. I knew patriots who were also petty. I knew brilliant minds housed in bodies, ruled by appetites and weaknesses. I knew myself to be a contradiction, a man who preached virtue while practicing vice, who championed freedom while profiting from its denial to others. And yet we talked, we reasoned, we compromised. We built something together despite our imperfections, not by pretending they didn't exist. And here's what troubles me most about your modern age. You've confused comfort with happiness, convenience with progress, and information with wisdom. I watch you scroll through those glowing screens, consuming an endless feast of facts and opinions, yet starving for actual understanding. You know the details of strangers' breakfasts, but not the names of your neighbors. You have 1,000 friends in your pocket, but feel more alone than any generation in history. We had less, so much less, no electricity, no running water, no instant communication. A letter to London took months. News traveled at the speed of a horse. Medical knowledge was primitive. I lost my son Francis to smallpox when he was just 4 years old, a pain that never truly heals. Yet somehow, we built nations. We created systems of government that would endure centuries. We made discoveries that changed the world, not because we had better tools than you, but because we understood something you've forgotten. We understood that difficulty builds character, that struggle creates strength, that the very act of working through problems, of wrestling with challenges, of failing and trying again. That's where human excellence comes from. You've engineered difficulty out of your lives, and you wonder why you feel so hollow. You've automated struggle, and you can't understand why you lack resilience. You've removed every obstacle, every delay, every moment of necessary patience, and then you're shocked when the smallest setback devastates you. I'm not romanticizing hardship for its own sake. I spent my life trying to make things easier, better, more efficient, but I understood the difference between eliminating unnecessary suffering and eliminating necessary challenge. The printing press made books cheaper, but you still had to read them. Eyeglasses made seeing easier, but you still had to think about what you saw. Better roads made travel faster, but you still had to make the journey. Your technologies don't just assist you, they replace you. And in that replacement, something essential is being lost. Not just skills, but the deeper capabilities that come from developing those skills. The patience, the persistence, the pride of creation, the connection to the world beyond your own mind.